Welcome, bienvenue. Welcome to another property-based live stream. This one's called Property Matters, and it stars Hamish McClay of Search Convey. We have one of our wonderful specialists that comes on the show, friend of the show, Zara Olibukas of Nexa Law. And today, I'm going back to school. Zara will school me in all the topics to do with shared ownership. But first of all, Hamish, would you care to take us away?
Well, we have the title, Shared Ownership, Stepping Stone or Stumbling Block. It's one of those things which has been introduced by somebody or other as being a sort of an excellent stepping stone to get on your ladder. We'll find out today whether it's a stumbling block or not. It's rather interesting that for whatever reason, it came to mind today for me to buy a book. It's by one of my favorite authors. If you're a serious reader, you perhaps like some of his material, but it does need a bit of, you do need to be a serious reader. A character by the name of Dr. David Hawkins. And he's written one of his books, which was about his fourth or fifth book. So I'm ready for it because I've read the first 3 or 4. It's called Truth or Falsehood. And how can we distinguish between truth and falsehood? Now, I don't want to put too heavy a sort of a damper on things before we get started, but some people will tell you something very often because they would like to sell you something. And one of the biggest challenges we have in life, even at my age, I struggle on occasions to figure out what is the truth and what is falsehood. And one of the things is shared ownership is one of those items which ought to be an excellent way forward. However, we'll let Zara tell us a little bit about and I'll give you an example later on as well, but we'll let Zara introduce it for us.
All right. So, Zara, welcome back to the show. It seems to me that shared ownership was one of those things that people thought up down the pub. On about 11th pint, they thought, this seems like a good idea. What could possibly go wrong? And yet here we are. So tell me, is shared ownership a chasm that we should leap over or something we should climb in bed with?
Well, it was introduced late 80s, early 90s. And you used to be able to pick the property you wanted to buy, and the funding would come that way. That was called DIY SO. But now they're bought in bulk from the developers, sometimes under Section 106 agreements. And let's just say that shared ownership is not actually shared.
Section 106, is that for compulsory purchase or something?
No.
What is it? What's Section 106?
Section 106 is where the the planning people are basically saying, we'll allow Mr. Developer to build X number of houses, but a certain number of them have to go towards affordable homes.
Right. Yes. I'm sorry. Got you. All right. Yep. Carry on.
So you lost me now. The red herring is that it is called shared ownership. It should be called part by part rent, because the only part that's shared is the part where you buy, and it's inextricably linked to leasehold. So you'll see some of the salespeople talk about it as another tenure. It's not another tenure. It's another type of leasehold. And people need to understand when they're entering into these agreements, it's a one-sided agreement entirely in favour of the landlord. If there's a problem with your flat or your house, you, the shared owner, expected to pay for it all.
What?
It's not, yes. And as we've seen with your Cladding Matters and other podcasts, these properties aren't always built to the best of qualities. I've been in some of them, and they are smaller than the houses that are sold to the general public. Yes, that the idea was that you you bought properties from the developers, so you didn't have the stigma of council housing because you could tell which properties were built by councils. But a lot of these properties are tiny, and what I'm finding is that the lease is no longer fit for purpose. It's actually quite an onerous financial agreement. If you buy a car, you know what you have to pay for at least 5 years. You've got fixed payments. This is actually a kind of sneaky little finance deal where you could buy the property in January, but your rent will go up in April the same year. So your rent goes up every year, RPI plus 0.5%. We had an issue during the pandemic where inflation went through the roof to 14%, and the government had to ask the housing associations to cap it at 7%. But it's built upon year. So your rent only ever goes up. It never gets adjusted according to inflation. So you need to have somebody that knows what they're doing when you're dealing with these leases, because you've got older versions of leases, you've got your newer ones, which supposedly come with £500 a year towards dealing with defects for the property, but I've yet to get a straight answer out of anybody how to go about claiming your £500 if there's a problem with your boiler or something like that. You've got this ridiculous 1% staircasing where you can buy more shares in 1% chunks, but nobody's ever told, make sure you get your solicitor to log it at the land registry for you, because when you come to sell, whore's the evidence that you've bought that extra 1%, apart from the housing association saying, yeah, here's the record. And let's just say the people who do the maths aren't that great. How to calculate rent at 39% or something silly like that if you've got 61% ownership. So there's all sorts of issues associated with not only new build shared ownership, but also existing ones. So if I give you a few examples, we've got valuation issues. So you've got to have a RICS valuation done before you can sell it. And so if you can't sell it for the price that the surveyor's given you, the shared owner's got to make up the shortfall out of their own pocket. And if you manage to get an estate agent to sell it for more than the RICS valuation, the housing association are going to want a piece of that large pie too.
Hang on a second. Colour me amazed, but where in this is the good news that it's a good thing to use? Give me a circumstance where shared ownership actually is more than just, I don't know, a pretty petticoat on what rather than buying a council house.
I mean, in the older days when I first started it, doing the work, people would tell me it's £100 cheaper to get a mortgage than it is to rent a property. So it worked maybe about 10-15 years ago. It was working. But now what we're seeing is the fallout from Grenfell, which is all these building safety costs which weren't factored in to when people bought,
right?
Remediation defects and things like that. And we've got people trying to sell these new build properties and saying, hey, buyer, here's a 10-year structural guarantee. Now you've got your average conveyancer who's sort of, thinking in a linear way that will say, okay, great, 10-year guarantee, no problem. Whereas, people like me and you, we've been through the wars with the campaigners, and we all know that these 10-year guarantees are not really worth the piece of paper they're written on. And when you're trying to buy or sell a shared ownership property, that guarantee stays with the housing association until 100% ownership. And so you'll see clauses in the leases about not being able to make a claim on the guarantee without the help of the landlord. So you're expecting your charity affordable housing provider to be benevolent. Okay, we'd like to have a little faith in these people, but don't count on it. It's not a guarantee. that you're going to get help to fight these people, to get the defects fixed. The people that sell you the properties in the first place are not the same team that looks after you to collect your rent after you've bought and does all the rent increases. And so people are coming to me telling me that they've not been treated fairly. Sometimes the housing associations don't own the blocks that they bought. So I'm seeing more and more complex legal structures. So where you've got this sandwich of your shared owner at the bottom, you've got your housing association in the middle, and you've got a freeholder at the top. Could be somebody out like a developer, professionally run management company, trying to get information about how the buildings run, where the money's going, gets very, very difficult. And your person in the middle is not interested in trying to help you challenge them. They just want you to pay.
All right, Zara, this sounds like a living nightmare. Is there an occasion these days where shared ownership is reasonable and applicable?
Well, I say to people, if you're looking at shared ownership, try and go for a house. But because you get out clauses trying to acquire the freehold. But even then, be careful, because I have numerous headaches trying to get information out of third-party management companies, which are baked into these development sites. So the housing association won't pay to get the information from the management companies, which you would expect of a normal seller. So everything is at cost to you. I'm looking at hideously drafted transfers of part, which are they come with the shared ownership lease, but a lot of the times they're incorrect, and you're having to challenge the housing association solicitors because they also want a service charge back to themselves once you own 100%. So these properties are blighted not just by one estate service charge, but two estate service charges, one to the third party management company and the other back to the housing association. And you're sitting there thinking, well, what are they actually doing apart from charging a management fee?
It does sound like a money-making scheme of the most arcane type. You haven't given me any reasons to believe that this is a shrewd move.
Well, I started off thinking, wow, what a great idea. And I almost jumped on the ladder myself. But they didn't make 4-bedroom houses, which is what I needed.
Thank goodness.
So I almost got into it myself. But the more and more I go through this, and the more and more you look at standard leases, you start thinking, this is not quite right. And the thing is, we've got lots of recommended solicitors that will just peddle these things through with standard information. And you've got people that have just got stars in their eyes and just think, I just want the key to my shiny new front door.
So, Hamish, it appears to me that when you see the word shared and ownership, that should fill you with the joys of spring, because you're not the only person having to share the burden. But it seems from what Zara said, that's anything but the case.
Well, Zara has spoken about some complicated aspects to it. Let me just explain a couple of simple ones. Now, many of our listeners and viewers will know Steve Day, who's in Royal Artillery Quays, and he was speaking several weeks ago when the topic came up, when we were speaking about the cladding of Royal Artillery Quays. Right. And what it was, the management company, who happened to be the builders as well on this occasion, they sent out a bill to all residents within the building. And I think altogether there's, I can't remember, it's over 400 flats, I think, throughout all of the particular sort of buildings. And this little invoice they sent out to each of them was for £30,000. Now, as it happened, it was illegal. Now, the thing is, that £30,000 went out to the 420 odd flats. Some of those have 30% shared ownership. So would one expect them to be paying 30% of 30,000?
One would have thought that.
Of course not. The management company, who only are 70%, were expecting the 100% from those shared owners. So that's just one example. So they're expected to pay all the full management fees. They pay 100% of the management fees. They pay absolutely everything. So it's not shared at all in that respect. It's just a term sort of shared, and they've been lent so much money. Another interesting one, just to put it alongside it, a colleague of mine, friend of mine actually, he was left a flat by his mother in a block of other sort of flats, which was one of shared ownership. He didn't realise it at the time because he got held up in probate and got had probate in. And yes, we might laugh.
Probate, I had the same thing, but it wasn't shared ownership. Probate is onerous enough when it's relatively simple.
Okay, well, so what happened? So this was 4 or 5 years ago. And so his mother died. Off he goes. So he goes into it and finds out, right, there's a couple of challenges with this. First of all, it's shared ownership. Then it's tied up in probate. The next thing is he wasn't really getting any help at all from the solicitor he was working with. But when the conclusion, I won't go into the full story because it'd take too long, take another 20 minutes or so. But what it amounts to, within the lease, he's too young to live in it because you have to be over 60. So he can't live in it. Within the lease, he can't rent it out. Yet he's still got to pay 100% of the management fees not to be able to live there.
That's absurd. Yet, yes. I guess, Zara, only too common.
It is too common, and what people don't realise, and what became apparent in the pandemic, is that if you die, your estate still has to carry on paying rent and service charges until you can sell that property. And sometimes these properties can stay on the market, like with your friend, an older person's shared ownership lease where it's age restricted, so kind of retirement lease. It's got to be paid until the property can be sold, and those kind of properties sometimes take a while to sell because a lot of people are now becoming more savvy as to what these agreements might entail.
Well, it does appear that they are onerous.
There is one complication to add to it. At the time, this was the only flat up for sale in this particular sort of block.
Right.
There are now in excess of 25.
Oh.
Because none of them are selling.
And this situation is only going
to... As Zara pointed out, he continues to say.
We've got... Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Hamish. We've also got these restricted staircasing leases whereby you can only buy up to 80% because the council want to keep that property within the affordable housing remit. So those can stay on the market for ages as well because you've got to show you've got local connections to be eligible for those properties. And I had a client recently try and sell one, and he said, well, we never had to jump through all these hoops when we bought, and some of our neighbours didn't. But when it came to his turn to sell, the estate agent found him a buyer, and we got delayed because the buyer suddenly decided the housing association solicitor suddenly decided the buyers needed to jump through all these hoops.
Ridiculous.
And don't get me started on lease extensions as well.
Quite so. All right, so what's to do? Zara, I need a solid steer from you. In 2025, when even if you're desperate, when push comes to shove, should we run for the hills rather than take on shared ownership, or is it still viable?
I think everybody has individual circumstances.
Good answer.
So look at what you're being told. Consider the information in front of you, and just be aware that what information you're being given is a snapshot of the position now. So, as I said, I was contacted by a young lady who bought in July a brand new flat, shared ownership. In September, she was hit with a Section 20 notice for fire safety remediation works, which you would have thought, should be covered under the structural warranty.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not my area because I don't do litigation, but, conveyancers need to be alive to what's going on in the wider industry and not just narrow-minded at the legal paperwork in front of them.
Hamish, what a mess. Would you and can you take us home, somehow shining the light of truth on this?
I haven't received my book yet. On completing the reading of my book on truth and falsehood, I should be able to establish for you. There are various ways, but you need to go to some Dr. Hook and his medicine show or sort of something like that to actually get the true answer, I think. I mean, Zara's painted the picture as, as staggering as it sounds. This is a method which is being used to suggest to people that there's two things, really. It's an element of, can I call it trickery? I suppose that's the nicest way of actually putting it. It's a way of somebody managing to keep to their Section 106 agreement by making affordable housing available. So it's cheaper properties that can be actually sort of sold on this particular sort of level, which in actual fact is going to end up, by the time you've finished, it makes it much more complicated for the poor soul. And of course, the worse it gets, the older the person gets, the worse it becomes. So it's even a bigger challenge as people get older. And, if they die in situ as well, they do have the big challenge then of they might leave a property worth £100,000, but by the time you've actually messed with everything, there'll be only half of that left in terms of equity. If you're lucky, that's if you were nearly fully owners, a 75% ownership. But it's a challenging thing. And as Sarah said, she wouldn't like to work with some of the stuff because of the litigation that we don't understand. So do look very, very carefully. Do look very carefully. And I think, as Zara sort of put down there, some of these things do sound too good to be true. It's not necessarily the best way for you to get onto the housing ladder. You need to speak with one of our other colleagues, Wendy Gibson from First Time Buyers Club. You speak to somebody like her, somebody like Zara, put the two of those together, and they will steer you in the right direction. Otherwise, be very, very careful.
It can be very expensive, as Zara has pointed out to me, to litigate after the fact. And to finish off with a quote from someone, but also from Zara, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. Until next week, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, read all the information, employ extra thinking, particularly critical thinking, before you jump on it just because it seems like it's a wonderful deal of the century. It says shared ownership. The only time they're sharing it is at the point of sale, and beyond then it's all on your shoulders. Until next week, goodbye.